crossover time. Listener questions live. Chalk Talk, Orange and Black Insider. All Bengals football, answering your questions live on the air. I am Anthony Cosenza, joined by the coach, Matt Minich. And the coach is doing well today because he surprised me with a little bit of news right before we took the air. The coach is officially back into coaching.
Yeah, the coach has been kind of retired for a little while, but getting back in the swing of things with the unprecedented spring Massachusetts high school season. So looking forward to it.
Well, congratulations to you, man. That's really awesome. We don't call him the coach just because we call him the coach. So congratulations to you. Sounds like a fun gig, and I know it's a unique season because of COVID, but a lot of people are trying to make it, trying to squeeze in football seasons how they can, and obviously being safe. So congratulations to you, man. That's awesome. And look forward to hearing more about that as the season progresses. We're doing listener questions live. So we've got a number of different ways that you all can submit questions to us and have them answered on the air. We've got 2 live chats going, one on YouTube, one on Facebook. So please feel free to utilize those live chats to send us some questions. We've got a couple via email that we've already got queued up that we will get to, but that is the obinsider@gmail.com. You can call or text us on the OBI line, 949-542-6241. You can tweet us at BengalsOBI on Twitter. There's a comment thread on CincyJungle.com. We've got a lot of different ways for you all to reach us. So let's get started. If you don't mind, Matt, if you're ready to go, we've got a lot kind of already teed up. And let's just kind of start with this one. Good friend of the show, Patrick Esther, says basically asking about Travion Williams. A lot of us thought that he was a guy that was going to fit well in Jim Turner's blocking scheme because of the Texas A&M connection, all of that. We've now seen that Joe Mixon, he may not even play the rest of the year. We don't know yet. It sounds like he might, but who knows at this point. You've got Gio Bernard getting a lot of touches, Samaje Perine getting some, but not a lot from Travion Williams. Is this the time to maybe look at him? And why haven't they gone to that well yet?
I mean, there's only so many reps, so many carries. I think Gio is really good at what he does, and I think that's pretty much what Travion does too. Now, Gio has, I believe, a year left in his contract, but I think they can get out of it reasonably inexpensively if they wanted to this offseason. I don't know if they want to, but I think they could. So it might be a good time to look at Travion because Gio is up there for what he's making compared to running backs in the league. And you've got, obviously, with what you're paying Mixon right now, too. We all love Gio, and honestly, he might be a better fit for what this offense is right now than Mixon is anyway. But that to me would be the slot. But when they drafted him and Anderson, to me it was like, okay, Anderson is Mixon's backup and Williams is Bernard's backup because they kind of fit into those two roles. And I was surprised when they drafted both of those guys and then extended both of the running backs because it definitely looked like they were planning on replacing one of them. So I don't know. I think he's just a little too much like Gio. But now that we've got less riding on protecting the quarterback, because we already screwed that up, it wouldn't hurt. Let's see what Travion Williams can do, especially in pass protection, because, again, that's what Gio does really well. And Travion Williams, that might be the only time I've ever watched college film and been like, wow, this guy is good in pass protection. And with the Jim Turner connection, the O-line coach was pushing the guy, for those reasons. So, I definitely think that they should get him in there and more carries, but I'd love to see him on some passing downs too.
I'm glad you brought up Rodney Anderson. We tend to kind of forget about him because he's not on the roster anymore. But man, would this be just a great time to see him if he was healthy, be able to play? He in that preseason last year just flashed a bunch before he ended up unfortunately getting that same knee injury. And I don't know if his football career will ever get back on track. I hope so, but gosh, that would have been a nice weapon to have right now, given the Mixon injury. But I think, why not? Why not give him a look, or give him more? Why not? What do you have to lose at this point? And you look at Gio's stats in terms of, and we all know what Gio brings, but I mean, the last few games, Matt, 30 yards on the ground, 32 yards on the ground, 18 yards on the ground, 30 yards on the ground, and then you had 62 against the Titans, and then another 37 against the Browns. These are the numbers basically since Mixon has been nursing that injury, right? So, I mean, there's nothing really there. The Titans game was a nice showing, but, there's not a ton there where you say, it's not like Gio's stringing together 100-yard game after 100-yard game. It's just kind of like, well, why not? What do you have to lose at this point to give Williams some touches? I do think, to your point about Gio's contract, if Zach Taylor does stick around next year and even much of his staff, I think that we're going to see a lot of these Marvin guys probably not be here anymore. I think we're seeing Geno Atkins' salary probably be shed from the books to potentially make some moves, maybe at offensive line, maybe Gio's contract, even though it's not huge, it still is a veteran running back contract. So maybe you see that one get cut loose and a couple of others. So we may see yet again another very different looking roster than one from just a couple of years ago next year.
I mean, honestly, I think that's kind of the problem right now. And like, I get it. Like, I think Zach wanted to make things work with everybody. And I think there's a number of guys around that it's just not going to work with. And they've held on to him for too long, and it's not really benefiting anybody right now. So, for whatever reasons, I would agree. I think a lot of those guys, I think you're going to see probably Geno, probably a Sean Williams, a lot of these guys that were from the Marvin era, definitely moving on. Because it's time. They've got to do those things, and I mean, and it sucks. With look, we all love Gio, and Gio's a guy too that obviously there was, Dunlap was saying some things on his way out, and there's been the Elise Jesse report that there's, discontent in the locker room, but Gio's one guy that came out and it's like, no, we love Zach, we're on board. So whether that's lip service or not, like he's not a problem. He's not causing problems. But yeah, maybe it just has to go because they're spending a lot of money at that position right now between those two guys.
Yep. And normally I would say, hey, call one out here, Matt, but we've got kind of a based on what you were just saying there. We've got Dean here, and I think he also texted us this. When can we get rid of Zach and Captain Lou? To your point here, I mean, I'd love to get your read on this because of the Elise Jesse report and because there was a recent statement by Joe Burrow saying he loves it in Cincinnati, he loves the team, that sort of thing. The comments by Gio saying there are no problems. Tyler Boyd kind of towing the company line as well. I mean, are these all things that kind of say as the Bengals, we will and should give Zach another shot in 21 based on some of this player speak that we're seeing? Or in your eyes, have we just seen enough to know what we know?
Well, I'm going to start with the Joe Burrow thing. I think you look at the Cleveland Browns, and I firmly believe that when they hired Freddie Kitchens, they hired a guy that their quarterback liked. Look, like I get it, and I think you take that into account, and you respect the way your quarterback feels about things. But in particular, when we're talking about a second-year guy, you're in charge of a multi-million-dollar, franchise business here. Like you can't be just relying on what that guy says to make that type of decision. All right, this isn't like Joe Burrow going in and pounding on the table and saying, "I need a speed receiver." Like that, it's different than this is my head coach. So I think it probably does matter. I mean, and it's definitely a positive in his side, but it really shouldn't, because at the end of the day, if it's about where you think the franchise is going and what you believe is going on. This has been a crazy year. We have the Elise Jesse report. Obviously, there's people with ties to that team, to that locker room, but nobody's in that locker room right now because of COVID. Yeah. So it's hard to really gauge. Now, look, Mike Brown should be in that locker room. Duke Tobin should be in that locker room. Gender issues permitting, Katie Blackburn should be in that locker room. Yeah. And when you're hearing things like this, you should be popping in. You should just be showing up and sitting in the back of Jim Turner's meetings and Lou Anarumo's meetings and seeing what's really going on. I mean, this is kind of perfect because a lot of these things are going on over Skype, so you can sneak on and they probably don't even know you're there most of the time. So I think those things are a concern, but at the end of the day, sometimes you're not treating people right, and it's a problem. And sometimes people aren't getting what they want, and you aren't doing things the way you want them to do them, and they become a problem for that reason. And maybe you're not really doing anything differently than the last guy did, but because they have their opinions. I mean, I think anybody that's been through a changing situation at work, seeing a new boss come in, like you've seen that situation played out with you or your coworkers where somebody just wasn't on board. So I don't know. I mean, I can't say that it's one or the other because, again, you have to be there. And that's what I think it comes down to is they have to be in those situations and know what's going on. There's definitely issues. There definitely needs to be some changes going on. How is Zach as a head coach? A lot of those things are really tough to see. But game management is something you can see. There's been some times we wanted to be more aggressive, but at the same time, I think they were running a little bit short now, but they were on pace to have a chance to set a record for fourth downs converted in the season. So, he is aggressive in some situations. As an offensive coordinator, you look at some of the situational issues he's had. So that's definitely a concern there. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to what changes are you going to make? What are you going to do? I don't think Zach's going anywhere. I think he's going to get another year. I think Lou might too. I think that depends on how much the locker room feels about that. I did a poll on Twitter the other day, basically asking, do you think this defense gives good effort on every play? And I think it was like 79% of people that took the poll thought they gave good effort. And I tend to agree. And that's what makes me wonder about the Lou stuff is, look, I get they're professionals and they're playing for the contract and they're playing for the next job. But at the same time, they're human beings. And again, if you've ever not liked your boss, which is probably all of us at some point, you probably didn't work that hard all the time when in that situation. So I don't know. And honestly, I think that they're so deficient on that side of the ball in terms of what they have in terms of pass rushers, and they really haven't had a cornerback too. Darius Phillips is okay. He's not a real cornerback too, in my opinion. I think he's a great like CB4 that can play all three roles for you, but you don't want him to go in the season with him as the guy. So I don't know. I think he has still been a little bit shortchanged. We thought they fixed all those problems, but then you didn't have Trey and you don't have Reeder and Carlos Dunlap didn't produce anything for you. So at the end of the day, you didn't really get much but a couple of young linebackers any different on that side of the ball. Now you take the next step. Like, we say, well, if they're not going to fire Zach, they're going to fire Lou. Well, if they're not going to fire Lou, you're not getting pass rush. Maybe it's Nick Eason. Al Golden was responsible for third downs and blitz packages. They're not getting a pass rush even when they're blitzing. He's done a good job with the linebackers. To his case with those rookie linebackers, but maybe that's a guy. And then of course we'll talk about Jim Turner. Last year the offensive line turned around at the end of the year. This year it didn't. So that's a pretty bad mark in his column. That they haven't been able to generate any sort of run game throughout this season. That's probably the most obvious one.
I'm going to say this to supplement a post I put up on Cincy Jungle today. It kind of centered around an interview we did this week with former Bengals wide receiver Tim McGee and some statements he made about Bengals management and stuff. I guess my message is there's a lot to be concerned about with the Zach Taylor era and the coaches on the staff. The lack of, someone said 13 sacks on the year is embarrassing. The complete lack of a running game, the offensive line issues, the handling of Joe Burrow and the passing volume behind that offensive line and the idea behind that. There are a lot of things to point directly at the head coach and his coaching staff, all of them vouching for players that are substandard at certain spots. And I mean, you're going to publicly uplift your players anyway. I get that, but I'm continuing to go back to that same well and expecting different results. But I'm going to say this, you got to also kind of be careful what you wish for here with the Cincinnati Bengals, because here's the thing. Zach Taylor very well could be a very innovative, awesome head coach. What we don't know, aside from the weird off seasons he has started his coaching career with, aside from that Tim McGee said it. Bengals head coaches have their hands in far more, and extensively so, far more responsibilities in terms of managing the football team. They're not necessarily doing just the X's and O's, player personnel. There's a management, almost a de facto GM portion that is put upon a Bengals head coach that basically no other NFL franchise does this to their head coaches. And, that comes with the smaller scouting staff, a lack of a true GM. They just put a lot on their head coach. And so if you want to usher out Zach Taylor, Lou Anarumo, and whatever in their 4 wins, that's fine. I can understand that sentiment. But what in the management structure in the Cincinnati Bengals, what is going to change to set up the next head coach that you bring in to be successful? Because now you look back and you go, well, did Marvin Lewis work wonders with this team to make them consistently competitive and get those 7 playoff appearances? Because now you're seeing a young and experienced guy getting thrown all of the responsibilities that Lewis had, and it's not going well.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for that. We forget how bad this team was when Marvin Lewis got here. And he made them a contender almost all the time, and obviously things got bad at the end. And you like anybody that's ever gone through a bad breakup knows, like you forget about the good times when the bad times come along. Yeah, I mean, there's definitely something to be said for that. He has he did do a lot with this organization. I think he compared the two, and Leslie Frazier was the defensive coordinator here in the first year, unceremoniously fired after the year. Very surprising, particularly to Leslie, from what I remember. Know, but that's the thing. And now this year we're looking at all these coaches and we're thinking, last year it was get rid of Lou, get rid of Jim Turner. And now this year again. So, the fact that he was willing to pull that trigger and to make some more moves than what Zach has done. That's definitely something that has an impact as well. But I mean that's a good question. Like, at what point do you make some changes? Yeah. Do you promote Duke and hire somebody else to his position? Do you hire somebody above Duke? Do you clean house in the front office? I personally like I get the idea of adding a GM. I don't think more scouts are necessarily better scouts. I've never been a fan of, you got to have more heads in the room. No, like you have to have the right voices, not more voices in the room. Because too many voices is a big time problem. If you don't, especially if you don't know how to sort them out. So that that's something I would look at and consider too, is just kind of how that breaks down. I honestly don't like, because he's not the GM. There's something so ambiguous about the Bengals, and I kind of love it as a coach because I don't want to tell people anything either. I used to go to coaching clinics and I wouldn't say a word and I would just listen and I would just people would tell me everything they were doing the next year. But if you look at the Bengals, like we'll take for an example. People have said Zach needs to give up play calling duties and give it to Callahan. We don't know what Callahan does.
Right.
Like, he might be calling the third downs already. Like he might be calling red zone already. And then, when people like me are complaining about situational football, that might not even be Zach. But we have no idea because they don't like to tell us those things, which again, I wouldn't tell us either. And it's the same sort of thing with Duke. He's not the GM. So obviously in terms of scouting and the caliber of players they're bringing in, that's heavily on him. But is it him that's spending money? Is it Katie that's spending money? Is it Mike Brown that's spending money? Like we don't really know. So it's kind of interesting, and like I don't know, it's probably by design that they set it up so you can't really blame anybody because you can't really be sure who's responsible.
Yeah, that's a great point. I guess you see and hear a lot of voices around the league that just kind of keep pointing to the scouting staff. They keep pointing to a lack of GM, and then you keep seeing the repeated problems of massive injuries to important players. Somewhere that has to be fixed, whether you're picking up the wrong people, you have some form of bad luck, or your training, conditioning staff, whatever that is, you need to figure out something there. And then, of course, these big whiffs in the last handful of drafts, starting back in 2015 with high picks, you just can't keep doing that and expect to have sustained success. And these are the types of things where you set up a coach potentially to fail, So that was kind of my point with that. Before we get to the next question, we wanted to spend some time on that because I know a lot of people are asking us about Zach and Lou, et cetera. So we spent a little extra time on that. But before we do, just want to remind folks, you can get in touch with us. Call or text 949-542-6241. You can leave comments in the live Facebook chat, in the live YouTube chat, the comment thread on Cincy Jungle. You can tweet us at Bengals OBI. You can shoot us an email, theobinsider@gmail.com. And I also want to give Matt an opportunity. He's got a nice shirt there. His Chalk Talk logo. Where can people get one of those, Matt? Growing the brand, my friend. Where can people get one?
You can get these through TeePublic. If you go to my Twitter at Coach Minich, so Coach with an H, Minich with an H. There's a link up top, and there's all kinds of stuff on there. There's T-shirts. Last time they've been having a bunch of sales with holiday season and everything. I think that this T-shirt was like $14 last time I looked, nice. Which is marked down pretty significantly. But they got hoodies, they got coffee mugs, travel coffee mugs, cell phone covers, all kinds of stuff. That's at Coach Minich on Twitter. Click up on the link on my profile, and you can get whatever Chalk Talk gear you are looking for there.
Yeah, there you go. Add one that has Red 7 Hot Route. You gotta do that.
I gotta throw that out there. Yeah, that's a good point.
Where are we going next, Matt?
New kicker.
Okay.
So there actually was a report on this that the Bengals actually are concerned about the kicking situation. They've got 2 on the roster. Can we see a surprise Austin Seibert appearance?
Maybe. This is the thing with me about when people are like, and I respect the heck out of Darren Simmons and what he has done as a special teams coach, because if you remember, I don't know if you remember 2002 and before, the Al Roberts special teams era. If you remember that, remember was it Travis Dorsch? Remember that, the guy that was the kicker punter? Remember,
wow, I remember that guy?
Yeah, you got to go back. He lasted like a half a season. Remember?
Yeah. There's a weird part of my brain that knows everything about NFL kickers, and even I don't remember that name.
Yeah, you got to go check that out. I'm pulling that one in the Wayback Machine. Neil Rackers, he was a mess when he was in Cincinnati, but he ended up having a solid career afterwards.
Great tackler, though.
Yes, he was a tough guy. The snapping issues, but Brad St. Louis kind of steadied it for a little while. Then he had issues that have caused them now to go to Clark Harris, and he's been a Pro Bowler. But look, my one thing with Darren Simmons is, he sticks with kickers that, at some point they show a propensity to not make a lot of clutch kicks. Shane Graham was a highly successful guy, missed a couple of really big kicks for this team in playoff games or to set him up for playoffs. You can go.
And they actually let him go for that reason.
Yeah. It took him a while, but yeah.
It's funny because we all hate Bullock. We all hate on Bullock, but Bullock is actually a pretty good kicker when it's not that important.
Right. Exactly.
He's missing the key kicks. So and they've done that in the past. They've shown that they'll move on from a guy like that.
Yeah, and then Mr. Andy Steve talks about Jake Elliott. That decision there, Jake Elliott's been a pretty good kicker for the Eagles. He's had a little bit of struggles, but he's been hitting longer kicks. So that's been my one thing with Darren Simmons, where I go, what do you want to do with the kicker? I don't think that they really make a move necessarily yet for a new kicker right now, but maybe that's something they look at next year. I don't know about you.
I mean, it'd be nicer, it'd be nice if you can bring more people into camp and you can, have a tryout besides the one guy that they had. He kind of been around in the past anyway.
Yeah.
So I mean that'll help a little bit too. But I don't know. It's definitely been frustrating. The Jake Elliott thing. I mean, that's another thing too. Like I would assume that they let Darren make that decision, but we don't really know who makes those decisions at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I thought that they both looked pretty good that preseason. But to me, you always go with the kid because the kids get better. This is what I like to call it I'm going to call it the American Idol rule.
Okay.
Because when you look at these singing shows, like those 14-year-old kids always end up being way better at the end of the competition when they get practice. All right. So it's the same thing with kickers, man. The kids get better. Randy Bullock, we knew who he was. He bounced around the NFL, and he had good moments. He had bad moments. He's been with some other teams. We pretty much knew that. Now I think Jake has had his ups and downs with Philadelphia. Mm-hmm. He had some highlights right away, went out and got the ring, which we all remember, but obviously things aren't going great for them anymore. But yeah, I mean, Super Bowl rookie year, but and he kicked like a 64-yarder like early in that season. It was a game winner too.
Yeah, I was just like,
which I get it. It pissed me off too,
yeah.
But yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you got to be able to do something about that, and bring those guys in and figure it out. And Darren was a punter by trade, but obviously you've got to be able to train and develop kickers in that job as well.
And I think kind of to dispute my own point, I guess, about kickers and Darren Simmons. I think what he realizes probably as a punter, the value of kind of that battery system on special teams when it comes to field goal, snapper to punter to field goal kicker, that having that continuity and those guys that know each other well. I think that he values that, and rightfully so, because for the most part, the snapping issues have been non-existent as they were before his tenure. And the special teams has really solidified from pre Darren Simmons. I guess I'm just kind of nitpicking on some of the things, and I have a lot of respect for what he's done.
I mean, that group has been great, and it was something that would be talked about a lot more if this team was winning football games in other ways. But
right.
I mean, overall they've been really good. Mike Thomas was a little early. Get over it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a situation too. Like people have asked me, why was Mike Thomas in? And look, it was Brandon Wilson and it was Stanley Morgan Jr. And Wilson got tight. His backup was probably Darius Phillips that wasn't playing because he was sick. You know what I mean? Like, man, how many guys are you working out at gunner? You know, you know what I mean? So it gets tough with those special teams things. That's what we don't always think about with injuries, is how much it affects those sorts of roles and kind of the rollover effect of some of those injuries.
Did you pull one up a second ago? I saw you kind of pull another.
Somebody said your Dorsch guy was a draft pick. So
okay. I got one here from 513. What's the deal with it's a text message. What's the deal with the Bengals staff not sharing info on Clint Bowling, Cordy Glenn, AJ Green, Geno Atkins, Joe Mixon? How can we expect Burrow to return for opening day? I still, even though I think Zach overhauled the conditioning staff or the strength and conditioning part when he came in, I still have real hesitations about this medical staff, Matt. They seem to, I don't know if mishandle is or misdiagnose is the right terms to use there, but guys are out for longer periods of time than we expect. I mentioned earlier the myriad of serious injuries to very important players, and a lot of them season ending. So, I mean, the one that wasn't talked about, I don't think, there's AJ Green's deal last year that just lingered, and they tried to do whatever they could with that. So I don't know if you have any additional insight on that, but that's just a troubling area that the Bengals need. That's one of these areas within the organization. They need to make sure they have top-notch care there to avoid these injury bugs, because they rely heavily on these guys that end up getting these severe injuries.
Yeah, I mean, I have heard, I forget who it was, but there was actually a lot of praise for the people that do the rehab recently, and somebody was talking about how like Burrow's in good hands. in terms of his knee surgery and his knee rehab. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely been issues with that and things that have lingered for forever. And obviously the coaches don't know any better, because if the coaches were getting the right information, you're putting AJ Green on injured reserve, especially last year when the roster wasn't as fluid and you could use that spot. So yeah, there's definitely something funky going on there. And I think that's a big part of the reason why we didn't hear anything about Burrow. I think Zach was realized I'm going to wait, and we're going to see what's really going on with this. Which honestly, before they even went in for surgery, I wouldn't want to comment about it either. I don't look, I'm not a doctor, but I'm a homeowner, and if you take your toilet apart or your sink apart or something, you don't really know what you're facing until you open that thing up. And I would imagine it needs at least something like that. Like, you do an MRI and stuff, but I want to get my hands in there before I started really talking about long-term effects. I mean, maybe a stupid analogy, but
good one. And look, these aren't things we were talking. We weren't heavily criticizing this in 2014, 2015 when this team was winning games. When you're losing games, you have 4 wins and a tie in the last 2 seasons. Nothing's off the table for discussion for improvement, right? I mean, that's kind of. I remember back in 2014. God, that game against the Colts in the postseason, the Bengals had nobody that was healthy for that game, and we weren't taking the medical staff really to task at that point. Because the team had 10 wins and, they were in the playoffs once again. We knew they probably weren't going to win that game because they were so depleted. But, I mean, these are the things now that come to the forefront of conversations when you have 4 wins in 2 years.
I think it also speaks to the depth. I think that's always been a problem for this team. There's a lot of times when they go into the year and you can look at generally when you look at their starting lineups at the beginning of the year, it's like, all right, that's pretty good. But the problem is there's too many guys that are like just okay. And when the just okay guys get hurt, like their backups aren't okay. So I mean it just kind of builds on itself. And who was the guy? I'm blanking. I had a really good example of a guy like that. But I mean, honestly, like you look at the guard situation right now, they got a lot of guards that are like, you feel okay putting them out there, but when Su'a-Filo goes down, who's his backup? Took them a few weeks to figure that out. Yeah,
I mean, you can look at the other starting boundary corner position. It was Trey Wayne, then you go Darius Phillips, and now what you're doing is CB6, LaShawn Sims is the guy who's starting on the boundary. So
nosedive. And that's the problem. Every successive layer, it gets to be a bigger problem. And I was talking to somebody on Twitter earlier, and said they thought that Phillips did a good job. I'm like, in small doses, yes, like he can do a pretty good job, and I'm fine with starting him in a game. I'm just not. I don't want him to be the CB2 for the season, because then what's the next man up look like? And again, it stacks upon itself, and all of a sudden you have a Darius Phillips, and you're planning on him being your fourth corner, which means for Darius Phillips that means backing up every position because he can play inside too. Maybe you're using him in some dime packages, you're using him in some special teams roles, and now all of a sudden he's CB2 for you, and he's taking. I'm throwing out 80% of the snaps on defense. I have no idea what he was taking. And now what's the drop-off? It's not just about the drop-off between Trey Waynes and Darius Phillips. It's about the drop-off between Darius Phillips and lost his name, the guy from the Titans. Yes, and Sims, and who's taking Sims's role and who's taking all these special teams roles. Darius Phillips is a guy that has struggled to stay healthy for a season, even when playing in a reserve role. So we had to know he wasn't going to be the cornerback 2 all year, and that Sims is going to be in there. I actually thought it was one of the smarter things that Lou Anarumo has done this year in the Colts game when Phillips and Sims went about 50-50, because I think he realized he didn't have one guy that he could count on the whole game. So he was trying to keep him rested, keep him fresh, and be able to go with them. Obviously, that rotation did not pan out very well in the second quarter of that game. But I mean, I think honestly, that like a lot of things that Lou Anarumo has done this year, I think are kind of desperation moves based on where the depth chart is at. And you can say the same thing about defensive line. And you look at defensive tackle with the Bengals, you look at the defensive tackle with the Cowboys, they're really in the same boat. They like both teams thought they had really good defensive lines, and both teams had unexpected problems, especially at defensive tackle. Tupou, opt out. Geno, got to be hurt, right? Like they're not even really come out and saying it. Reader, he's out. You look at the
Dunlap is satisfied.
Yeah, and you look at the Cowboys. Poe didn't work out for them. Everson Griffin on the edge didn't work out for them. Gerald McCoy got hurt on the first day of camp. We know what that's all about. So I mean, it was just it's just brutal. And sometimes you get those things, and it adds up in a position. And I mean, it can really really get you for the season when those things start to add up like that.
Yeah, I mean, the way this was constructed, and we'll get to the next question here. We'll be here for just a couple more minutes. But the way this was constructed in the spring and the summer, Matt, it looked like defensive line was going to be kind of a strong point of this team with Reader there. You had Geno, who at the time was healthy. You could mix in Mike Daniels once you added him. You had a nice rotation in the interior, even though Tupou opted out. You had a nice rotation in the interior. You had Dunlap. You had Hubbard. You had Carl Lawson to work off of the edge.
And Wren. I forgot about Wren got hurt too.
Yeah. And then at corner, you had Jackson, Waynes, Alexander, Phillips. I mean, and you went down and down and down, and you go, hey, this is stacking up kind of nicely here. And then all of a sudden it was injury after injury. So then we're kind of coming full circle on this thing. But where do you want to go next?
I don't know. I'm bad at reading these things while we're going.
Let's go. We had an email. You have a couple emails that we maybe want to get to here. There's one about Jason in Germany. It's cool that a guy in Germany listens to us, by the way. Yeah. Talking about Marvin Lewis coming in, returning to a role as a GM or some sort of position like that with the Bengals. I mean, Jason talked about how the Browns and the Blackburns trusted Marvin. There was a really good relationship. Obviously, he wouldn't have been there for 16 years if that's the case. And he was, if you ask Tim McGee, if you ask Takeo Spikes, if you ask anybody we have talked to, and we mentioned Marvin Lewis, that, they all say Marvin brought modernity, if to use a term, a modern age to the Cincinnati Bengals. And maybe in that role, he could potentially do the same and bring the Bengals back to respectability. Number one, I don't think Marvin's coming back to Cincinnati in any capacity personally. Number two, I think it may not be just the best idea for the Bengals to go crawling back to Lewis. I don't know. But and we've never seen Marvin Lewis. I mean, I mentioned earlier, head coaches kind of act as a little bit of a assistant GM or something like that with the Cincinnati Bengals, but we've never really seen Marvin in a true only front office capacity. Has done a little bit of stuff at ASU, but that's just my thoughts. What are your thoughts about Lewis returning to the Bengals in any kind of capacity, Matt?
Well, there was a report, I think it was from Daniel Jeremiah, that Marvin is getting a lot of head coach buzz. Yeah. And I'm here for it. Like, I don't think you can't go back. No. He hasn't been gone for long enough, and it's not like it was an internal hire. I think they're trying to go a different direction here, and just like the Dunlap thing, it's not better or worse. It's just different. I don't think it works for him here. But yeah, I think teams should talk to him. I think the Texans and whoever else has jobs, I think they should bring him in. I think they should talk to him. And look, he took a team that was nothing. I mean, like the 90s were so bad. Like, and we forget how awful that was, and now we're reliving it. Hopefully not for as long, but like they were always competitive in the 2000s. They were always competitive with Marvin. And it's not just about 5 years straight in the playoffs. Like before that, like they had some good years. They put some stuff together. He was always able to bring in good assistant coaches, like three really good offensive coordinators in a row at one point. And I mean, at some point things fell off, things changed. And I think there were some, inklings of that beforehand, but yeah, I think should be in the NFL. If I'm looking for a head coach or a defensive coordinator and I'm not the Bengals, I would talk to him. But it doesn't make sense for the Bengals. For me. The only way for me it would make sense is if you're going totally anti Zach Taylor and you're like, nope, this isn't working. We got to go back. And you're bringing in Zimmer and with Marvin running the show. Somebody said that
an all-star cast or something. Yeah.
At least that works to me. I wouldn't do that. I think it's good that we're moving on. But yeah, that'd be my take on it.
Yeah, it's working to a degree a little bit with the Raiders with Gruden, but not to the Super Bowl type of level quite yet. But look, I mean, I want to see Marvin operate in a different organization to see. I think we would get a real read on how effective of a coach Marvin Lewis truly is when he doesn't have all the stuff that would be on his plate like he had with the Cincinnati Bengals. And quite honestly, to your point, Matt, I think probably, right in that 2016, that loss against the Steelers, I think all of the stuff that he has had to juggle with the Cincinnati Bengals, that's kind of a revelation I had this week, given that news that he's starting to get some run for head coaching positions. I kind of feel like all that stuff started to wear on him. And like your correlation that you made where someplace you work, there's a management shift. It's also, I've worked at places where you have a lot of talented people and management places too many differing responsibilities on that one person. An outside sales guy isn't necessarily really good at inside customer service on the phones, right? They're outside working with people, networking, all that kind of stuff. They're not necessarily great at doing the phones. Well, Bengals coaches are kind of, if you want to use a weird analogy, they're kind of doing all that stuff. And you need to let them concentrate on some of their strong points. So that's where I'm curious to see where, if Marvin Lewis lands somewhere else, I think we'd get a good picture as to how good of a head coach he really is.
That's a great point. And to kind of build on that, crap. Sorry, I was trying to pull something up. I was trying to throw out an exact number, but even just coaching, I got burned out from coaching. That's why I retired for a while there. And NFL coaching in particular, I'm trying to look it up here, but Dick Vermeil, that guy was gone for almost 2 decades, something like that, like 15 years or something, between the Eagles and the Rams. And that dude was living the good life on a vineyard, just chill for during that time. So honestly, I think these guys are better off taking a few years off and coming back. And I think even under normal circumstances, it can burn you out pretty good.
Yep. You see another one or two in here that you want to get to? Anything piquing your interest that we didn't get to yet? There was one we got email wise. If you're not finding one, talking about uniform changes, do you think that that's maybe something on the horizon for next year with the young Zach Taylor and Joe Burrow kind of being the faces of the team?
I mean, honestly, it would make a lot of sense because how many people bought Joe Burrow jerseys?
Yeah.
And you know what? How many people will buy another one if they make a new jersey? They probably a lot of people will. So I mean, I think it makes, and honestly, I've heard before that it's a process that takes a little bit of time. It takes a couple of years, the process they normally go through with that stuff. But right now, they've just lost a lot of money from only being able to have so many people in the stands. And the concessions and all those sort of things. So, a rebrand just to generate a little bit of cash flow would be a very smart business move for them right now. I mean, honestly, I think a lot of teams probably you're going to know who the smart teams were because I think the really smart business teams probably thought about that in August, and we're probably going to, if not in 2021, we'll be seeing them in 2022. I don't know if it'll be the Bengals or not, but yeah, I think it's time. Those whites are terrible.
the color
shoulder. Yeah, like the whole shoulder thing. Like I don't know. Like the Bills had done that before, and I didn't think it worked for them either. The Bills have long since moved on from it, but those color rushes are awesome. But yeah, I mean, I definitely like to see them do something a little bit different.
I'd like to see them at least mix in the maybe the old school one with the Bengals wording on the side. Wear those once a year, just kind of mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, throwback would be awesome. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What else we got before we hop on out of here?
Zeke can't catch. Somebody says Zeke can't catch. Zeke can catch. I just want to get into the Cowboys a little bit. I mean, this Cowboys team is like I just did an interview. If you want to download that podcast, check it out with RJ Ochoa from Blogging the Boys, SB Nation's Cowboys site. Like we've got a lot in common with that team. Both teams have suffered a ton of injuries. Their quarterback, their defensive line, they've got they had a really good offensive line at the beginning of the year. Most of those guys aren't around in Dallas. So things are kind of adding up. They both have head coaches that the fan base definitely doesn't trust, and there's questions whether or not the players trust them. So I mean, this is going to be really interesting. It's not just the Andy Dalton Bowl. It's not just the Penny Bowl for the third overall pick, perhaps. It's going to be interesting to see which of these teams is heading in the right direction. Because I really think that says it strongly. I mean, you can make a case that at least offensively in the skill positions, they are in a better position than the Bengals are in Dallas. But I mean, they've got a lot of problems. They've got a lot of problems in the line. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see how this thing really, really pans out. I'll also point out one thing. So the Bengals ran for 205 yards against the Jaguars. That was their highest rush total of the year. The Jaguars on the season have the 30th ranked defense against the rush. The Bengals are 29th. The Jaguars are 30th. The Cowboys are 32.
Dead last. Yeah.
And they've given up over 30 yards per game. Like the Cowboys and actually the Texans, oddly enough, are the outliers that are really bad. And then the Bengals and Jaguars are I think they're like 130-ish. There's a handful of teams that are right around there. Still bad, but like the Texans and Cowboys are exponentially worse against the run. So if the Bengals can actually run the ball, and you're going to get stuffed boxes because nobody's afraid of Brandon Allen. But if the Bengals can actually run the ball and generate some offense that way, they might have a chance in this thing. Honestly, looking at those stats, it's like, geez, they might have a chance against the Texans and the Cowboys.
Yeah.
If they can do something offensively because they can run the ball, and again, they need to supplement things. They do need to be able to pass the ball and empty out some of those boxes. But I don't know. It's going to be interesting. We had a great conversation with RJ, and if you want to feel a little bit better about this weekend, definitely listen to that conversation.
Yeah, please do. That one is, let's end on this one down here in just a sec, but please do. And all of our audio content is on your favorite streaming platform, iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Megaphone, iHeartRadio, all that stuff. So go check it out. Download the Cincy Jungle podcast channel, Matt's Chalk Talk episodes, the Orange and Black Insider episodes, and Orange is the New Black by Ace and Zim are all on there. Do us a favor too, especially on iTunes. Helps us with a little bit more visibility. Leave us a rating, hopefully a positive one, but leave us a rating and let us know how we're doing, and that helps us get bumped up a little bit. We've been hovering in terms of worldwide football podcasts throughout the year. We've been kind of in that top 40, so we've been one of the top podcasts, which we've been pretty proud of. So appreciate the support, and if you can give us a little more, that'd be awesome. We'd appreciate that too. Let's end here with Dave Lennox. We talked a little bit, you and I did, before going on the air, Matt, about Penei Sewell and a couple of other guys. If we get the third overall pick, you talked about potentially the Bengals getting 2 more wins here based on a couple of these games coming up. How far back would you be willing to trade to add capital? I think it's also, this could take up an entire podcast episode probably, but do you trust the Bengals to move back and get out of range where these blue chip marquee players are? given the lack of resources we've talked a lot about on this Listener Questions Live episode here. I mean, it's almost kind of like, well, they seem to do best and have the best yields when they have these really high picks and these great players kind of fall in their laps. When they get outside of the top 10, when they get into the 20s, yeah, I mean, there's some nice classes in there. 2012 was a really nice class for this team. But, I mean, there are times, if I go back to 2015, they're in the 20s and that draft killed them. So, I mean, I'm kind of like, well, if you have a high pick, maybe stay put and take the best guy that's there, particularly if it's offensive line. I know there's a lot of roster holes, but I don't know if I trust this team to nail a ton of picks, especially when you move out of the marquee type of positioning.
Well, I mean, John Ross was number 9. So, but I think the Bengals, like other teams, when they get in trouble is when they get locked into a position. So that to me, I think you draft the best available player. They took a lot of heat over waiting as long as they did to draft a tackle in this year's draft. Honestly, I think they probably wanted to take a tackle in the round 2, and they couldn't believe T. Higgins was there. I believe we have heard that they had a high second round grade on Logan Wilson too. So it could have been the same thing, and that's how they came out of there. But that's why you got to take care of things, and the draft needs to be extra. You can't be drafting need. You need to take care of needs in free agency, and then draft for the best available player, because that's how you set yourself up in the best possible way. Now, we were talking about this before. I haven't watched enough film. I've watched a significant amount of film on Penei Sewell. I haven't watched enough on some of these other guys. I think there's a number of edge rushers and offensive linemen, guards and tackles, that will go in the first round who could help out this team. But I don't have them specifically rated out. If you're close with Penei and a couple other guys, take the picks. I mean, like take the picks. But if you look at Penei, if you really think he's that guy, if you think he's the generational guy, if you think he's a can't miss prospect, I have trouble thinking that way about him. Just like last time he played football, he was 19 years old and he took an entire year off. It's just like so hard to find precedent for this sort of thing. In terms of calling him a can't miss and stuff. But if you think he's that guy, take him. Take him. Protect your asset. Jonah Williams already plays left tackle. Don't care. Figure that problem out later. One of them can play right. I don't really care. We'll get into that debate later, I'm sure. But honestly, whoever can figure out how to play the other spot better, I'm fine by it. And guess what? That guy's going to have to block TJ Watt twice a year. So I don't really think left tackle is much more valuable than right tackle when you see TJ Watt twice a year anyway.
And check out Matt's Twitter handle. I think you also put a Cincy Jungle post up on Penei Sewell, just kind of doing some film review and whatnot. Yep. His tape is phenomenal. I mean, his tape it's ridiculous.
The dude's a freak athlete. I mean, it's pretty crazy how athletic he is. And honestly, I would have loved to see him play this year, because there's a lot of little things. But if you watch his games early in the year in 2019, and then you watch him playing in the Rose Bowl, there were some big steps that were taken even in a small amount of time there. But just the way he moves, man, he's just a freak athlete, and the Bengals love these guys that can move around well. I think Jonah's got incredible feet too. That's something that we really liked about him. That's something that we really like about Hakeem. How good he is, how smooth he is with his feet. So, I mean, he would be an exciting guy to go for. Absolutely. But like we said, we'll look at the other guys. I think both lines need a lot of work right now.
Yeah, it's just that year off. I guess we'll end on this one, because this one's specifically directed to you, Matt. Brian in Iowa, how well do the Bengals execute the basics right now or fundamentals? Mm-hmm. You being Coach Minich, what are you seeing on that front?
It's a broad question. And shout out to Iowa. I actually grew up in Minnesota, believe it or not. So, about 20 minutes from the Iowa border. Played semi-pro with a little team called the Esterville Raiders, which is not bragging because it was not a good thing. Sorry, Brian, if you play for the Esterville Raiders. But anyway, yeah. I mean, if we look at things, look, the tackling was awful at the beginning of the year. It was awful, especially in that Browns game. I think it's gotten a lot better. Jesse Bates is still not a good tackler, but I think overall it's gotten a lot better. I think they've drafted some guys that are real good. Logan Wilson is a very strong tackler. Honestly, I think William Jackson might be the best tackler they've got right now. I think he's been very, very impressive, especially for a cornerback. Defensively, the thing I think they don't do well is getting off of blocks. And that's what really bugs me about our defensive line. And I mean, I don't want to, again, I'm not around all the time. I'm not in it. So I don't know what the thought is. Part of me thinks it's Nick Eason, who's got a pretty strong track record coming from the Texans and everything. But there are times when they're getting pushed into the pocket, but they just don't come off the blocks. And there's a play with where Carlos just jumped up into the air against the Eagles, and it was just just throw a rip, put a move on this guy. So I would say I think their tackling has gotten a lot better. I think a big problem that the defensive line has is disengaging from blocks, whether it be in pass pro or even to some extent. I think they've gotten better in the run game, but even to some extent, getting off of blocks to make plays in the running game. Blocking kind of goes without saying. Not a strong suit. This offensive line needs a lot of work, both run blocking, pass blocking. I think that Drew Sample has gotten a lot better this year.
Yeah, he has.
And look, we've seen more in the pass game, but I think he's a really good blocker now. He's what he was supposed to be. He's become that over the course of the year, and in pass protection too. I think he's been pretty impressive as a blocker. There've been games where they had too many drops, so I guess you could probably say that might be a little bit of an issue with some of the receivers. That's been the minority of the time. And honestly, I think it was I think it might be kind of a bright light sort of situation. That I believe that was against the Steelers, and they really weren't helping Burrow out. They had a couple of drops in there. So yeah, they could. At the end of the day, it comes down to blocking and tackling. I think they've gotten better at tackling, and I think they definitely need to get better at blocking.
Yeah, I guess it's a question of how much of the errors and issues are just a lack of talent in the injuries, and how much of it are the mental mistakes, right? I see mental mistakes from similar players, but I also I agree with you that the tackling has greatly improved, and I think the investment at linebacker has really helped that issue, and actually some of the corners that they brought in, they really emphasized tackling. So I do think tackling has improved for a good part.
And you talk about when you're talking about the mental aspect too. I think you say the same thing there for the corners. That I think that might be why Dre's not here, because there were times last year when you saw coverages and literally me and you and John Sheeran would be sitting here going, I don't even know what this is supposed to be.
Right.
You're not seeing that anymore. And look, people don't love seeing defensive tackles drop into coverage. I get it. But the Patriots did it last night. But yeah, now things seem to make sense. So I think they've taken that step. I think the coaching has improved in that way. Maybe that's Steven Jackson, the new corners coach. Maybe he's communicating things a little bit better. Maybe he's more on the same page with Lou than his predecessor was. But yeah, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add on that point.
No, it's good. And, and that's where the entire coaching change debate kind of goes round and round, because there's so many issues that were outside of Zach Taylor's control over the past two off seasons, his first as an NFL head coach. There are a lot of decisions and other things that he made staff wise, et cetera, that are real indictments against his coaching prowess. But you also look at, again, to the question here, it's just kind of well, we're seeing some good signs, but we're also seeing a really depleted roster with and bad signs. So it's kind of like it's really hard to put, for me at least, a real evaluation on some of these things. And I think that may be kind of a sticking point with Bengals management when it comes time to make a decision on the coaching staff and what they do moving forward.
Yeah. And like, specifically you look at the O-line, and I think the O-line took a step back because the O-line it was getting better at the end of last year. Joe Mixon ran for over 700 yards in the last 8 games last year after doing like nothing in the first half of the year. So at least like they could run the ball, like they figured some things out on the offensive line. And that was, and they were in a bad position last year. They had John Jerry playing left tackle.
Yep.
And it wasn't until the very end that you started to see Fred in there. He played about a game and a half at the end. Now they should be better. They had Jonah up until now for the most part. So they should be in a better position, and that they've taken a step back. I think the difference, if you look at the defense, is they're better than they were last year. And I get that they're still at the bottom of the league, but they're better than they were last year, and they're really not in a better position. They should have been. And preseason, I talked about this as being Lou's got to put up now because he's got Trey Waynes, he's got G.J. Reader, he's got Josh Bynes. They spent a lot of money, but he doesn't have Reader. And he ended up not having Carlos, whether that was his fault or what the situation there was. And he never got Trey Waynes. So, you look at it and like, yeah, I don't know. If you don't have really good corners, but you've got a good pass rush, you can figure out how to play some pretty good defense. If you don't have a really good pass rush, but you've got 2 shutdown corners, you can figure out how to play some pretty good defense. If you don't even have a CB2 that's like a real dude and you can't get after the quarterback,
it's a mess.
I don't know what you're expecting. And that's what, like, I do see a lot of things that they're doing. Like, I think we want them to blitz more to account for it, but then you got to be really good in coverage because you're going to be in, you're going to be in man, you're going to be in solo coverage a lot when you're doing those sort of things. But like you do see a lot of the game planning around taking care of some of the issues, taking away the run game from some teams. Like they've had some really good game planning moments. And I'm not going to claim that Anarum is a genius in those terms or anything like that, but there have been some really good moments. The Ravens game was pretty impressive. Like you take like the first quarter, but part of that wasn't even his fault. The score late was I believe a pick 6. It's like, so they did pretty well against that Ravens team the first time around. So I don't know. That's the difference. That's why, like in my head, I think you're going to change on the O-line, but I don't think you're going to. I could see not changing the defense because I do think that he got the short end of the stick and some bad luck on that stuff. So I could see giving him another shot. Now, having said that, just because a guy, here's the metaphor I used. I made up on Twitter the other day. Just because you can take lemons and make lemonade doesn't mean that with the proper tools and everything that you can make like a really good scotch. You know what I mean? Like things are more complicated. And I think that Lou Anarumo should not be fired because of what he did this year, because of the product he put in the field. Because I think he did about as good as anybody can do with the resources that he had. Does that mean that he can make this defense as good as it needs to be competitive, to make a run? That doesn't mean that. So again, it's just like you're evaluating Zach Taylor. It's not about I don't get rid of him because the defense had a bad year. Get rid of him if you don't think he can get the defense to where they belong next year.
Yeah, and Brian follows it up saying penalties are coaching mental mistakes. Yeah, some of them are, but there's also, and that's a good observation there. But also, I think some of them point to physical or roster deficiencies. If you have a person who holds a lot on the offensive line, that's not necessarily a mental mistake. I don't think. I think sometimes it just shows that they're overmatched physically, and they're not really up to snuff on the offensive line. So I mean,
yeah, it's hard to say. I think there's a bit of both of that when you look at something like holding,
right?
But I mean, there have definitely been too many false starts and things like that are definitely They're definitely mental errors. So, Brian makes a good point on that, but I understand your point on that too.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all the questions, guys. We've gone a little long, but it's been a lot of fun chatting with the coach, Matt Minich. He has also, aside from the podcast episode he has out, he did a video review of Xavier Suafilo and Hakeem Adeniji. It's on our YouTube channel, right under Matt's, right next to the logo of Chalk Talk on his shirt.
Yeah.
On his left arm, there is a Orange and Black Insider. If you're watching us on YouTube, click that. You can subscribe to our channel, get all of our material as it comes out, get notified when we go live. Same thing with Facebook. Make sure you like the Cincy Jungle Facebook page, and you'll get notified about that stuff. Subscribe to the Cincy Jungle podcast channel on your favorite audio streamer. We appreciate all the support. Enjoy yourselves this weekend. Matt's going to spearhead the Narragansett Beer pregame show an hour before kickoff all the way up to shortly before kickoff. We'll have a postgame show as well. So we've got more content coming for you this weekend. Hey, Matt, appreciate it, man. Have a good weekend.